Welcome back into the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast with our closer, part number 4, Rob Veno, wagertalk.com. Follow him on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports. Robbie, welcome on in. How you feeling?
I am good today, Drew. Again, like I say every Thursday when we do this, one of my favorite segments of the week, we get to talk a lot of teams that don't get talked about much across the internet. So glad to do it with you. Glad to be doing it for such a long time with you. And we'll see what we've learned from weeks 1 and 2, right, Drew? Sometimes 1 and 2 are a learning process, and then we can really kick it into gear here starting in week 3. And just before we start, real quick, you and I talking off there, the batch that we're doing, there are a bunch of 4-touchdown or better games. So I apologize to those watching if we're a little brief on those, but there's really not much we can tell you when games are line 31, 35 that you probably don't already know.
Sure, Rob. That's a good point. And there are some good ones, but yeah, we'll hit on all of them. Every single game on the board. If you're new to it, wherever you're downloading your podcasts at, on YouTube, Facebook, on Twitter, every game on the board, at Drew Martin Betts on Twitter, at Rob Veno Sports on Twitter. We are part number 4, the last part, guys. 193, 194, that's the rotation numbers, those little numbers next to the team name. We're going down in rotation order, numerical order, that is, and finishing out the slate here at the bottom of the college football board. Akron at Kentucky, first game up here, 49.5 being the total. Kentucky, the Wildcats, minus 26-point home favorites. I'm a little bit worried this Wildcats team isn't as good as years past here, Rob. But having said that, it's a MAC team coming in against SEC athletes. Kind of a tricky handicap. You like it anything in Lexington at the top?
Yeah, it's interesting, Drew. We'll drill in on this one just a little bit here. And from my standpoint, it's interesting because I played Kentucky over 6.5 season wins because I thought with Devin Leary at quarterback, they were going to be really good this year. And there were a lot of things on offense that suggested they would be. There's a couple of teams that we'll talk about here where maybe I can apply the same type of logic and we'll see what happens. But right now, if I start with Akron, they're just not responding whatsoever to head coach Joe Moorhead's pass-happy offense, right? I mean, it's his second season. You'd think they would get a little better. Last week against Morgan State. Now, I'll just, identify Morgan State for the folks that don't watch FCS football a little bit. They have climbed my power ratings by 6 points in 2 games, so they're improved. But where they started, they would be at least 2-touchdown underdog to any FCS team or FBS team out there, excuse me. So that shows you it's a really poor FCS team that's climbing the ladder a little bit. But Akron could only gain 254 yards at home against this team last week. They got sacked 5 times by Morgan State. That's not good. And it doesn't suggest that it'll get any better here as Akron goes. These, of course, as we know over the years, Drew, these MAC SEC games are basically paychecks. And Kentucky's already handled Ball State here 44-14, a game where they got off slow but came on strong and won by 30. So that kind of fits what they're facing here. Akron can't run the ball whatsoever. That doesn't bode well against Kentucky. They've played really, really good defense in their 2 games. Statistically, great numbers. But it's against Temple and Morgan State. It's not against Kentucky. Here's the point I'm going to make about a couple of teams, and I'll start with Kentucky. I feel almost like Kentucky's just cakewalking through these games. Their non-conference is so easy, and it's all at home. They haven't had to go on the road. They've had Ball State. They've had Eastern Kentucky, where Eastern Kentucky's an in-state foe, a playoff-type FCS team that can give you a couple of problems, and they've given Kentucky problems the last couple of years. So sort of take that with a grain of salt. But I feel like Kentucky might be just breezing through, trying to figure some things out before they hit the road against Vandy next week. Next week is an SEC division game. It's an SEC conference game. One thing they have discovered here real quick, Drew, and I was kind of anticipating this when I played them over 6.5 wins. They found some game-breaking wide receivers. They already had Berrien Brown, who actually is projected to be a first or second round pick by a lot of the NFL draft experts already. So wide receivers out of Kentucky that go 1 or 2 are rare. And they've added to it a guy named Tavian Robinson, who's a speed burner and has had some big plays the last couple of weeks. So I think you may see Devin Leary and Kentucky's offense open up just a tick this week. in preparation for the SEC season next week. Not to show Vanderbilt too much, but just to get things going here. If I had to play, I'd probably lay the 25 because I just don't think Akron can score here. But you're right in saying they've been kind of unimpressive. Whether that's by design or not, I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure. I watched a lot of that Ball State game you brought up. They won by 30 points. It should be noted. I mean, I said they might not be as good because they actually didn't look good, like you talked about. They scored a touchdown on the last play of the game, Rob, which I guess in this point spread range, it's one of those things you got to log in like, oh, Mark Stoops was still kind of pushing the ball to cover the spread. And sure enough, they have another MAC team here right in that point spread range. So maybe it could be actually a positive now that I think about it. But either way, just wanted to throw that out there. 195, 196, 7:30 Eastern. Syracuse and Purdue. Rob, this game last year was a great one. -2, -2.5. We're seeing Syracuse as the road favorite, 58 being the total.
Yeah, and some things, at least after 2 weeks, Drew, seem to have changed a little bit. And they changed the number in this game, right? It opened at pick, and all of a sudden the road team Syracuse has become a 2.5-point favorite. So a lot of Syracuse love money-wise early this week. Now we're past midweek, so it's still hanging in there. Syracuse through 2 weeks, and now this has not been the best schedule, but they've outscored their opponents 113-7. That's pretty good. Syracuse right now ranks number 3 in the nation in points scored per game. The two opponents, Colgate and Western Michigan. Again, nothing to brag about, but I think a couple of things to note here where Syracuse is concerned. And we'll see if they're for real because you're going to a Big Ten stadium to play a Big Ten team. 99 of the 113 were scored by the offense. They've had a defensive touchdown each of the first 2 games. And it's interesting to note because Rocky Long is their defensive coordinator now. And Rocky Long for years, New Mexico State, San Diego State, or excuse me, New Mexico and San Diego State. We know him as the guru of the 3-3-5. Syracuse had played it prior, but his system seems to be working. I mean, and again, it's lesser competition, so we don't want to jump, off the bridge right away. On the offensive side, Garrett Schrader, another really solid year. He seems to be improving every single year because he's off to a monster start at quarterback. And the one major thing aside from the defense and the pressure-filled 3-3-5 that I'll note here real quick is that their offensive line has been a sieve for the last 2 to 3 years. Quarterbacks running for their lives. There were times when I would fear when Garrett Schrader was out scrambling and running that he was going to get absolutely destroyed and hurt for the year. But the offensive line play has been better, right? 3 sacks and 76 pass attempts. That's really good. That's like one every 26, right? Close to 26, 25 in a third. So if they are improved at all and they're protecting him at all, that's a good sign for Syracuse. So far, the numbers show it. We'll see. Purdue wins in Blacksburg last week, but it was one of those funky games like we saw. I think almost every ACC game was in a weather delay last week. And that Purdue-Virginia Tech game, that thing was stalled for like 2.5 to 3 hours before they came back and played. So it's kind of hard to judge, but Purdue got out quick. They allowed Virginia Tech to catch them at 17 at halftime, and then they win in the end. But Virginia Tech was chasing right till the end. And that's kind of a theme because in their first game, Purdue choked the lead at home to Fresno State late in the game. So they're not necessarily hanging on to these leads. They had the head coaching switch right there, led by defensive-minded Ryan Walters. Now Jeff Brom out, Ryan Walters in. They become a run-heavy team, or at least a run-oriented team. The percentages I have for them play calling wise are 54-3 to 45-7. So they're running the ball more, but they still they're not running it well. And, if you're trying to force the square peg in the round hole against the Syracuse defense, maybe it won't work here. I think that Syracuse might be the most well-rounded team they've played so far. Fresno's good offensively, not great defensively. And Virginia Tech is just mediocre on both sides of the football. So maybe Syracuse, maybe the line movement is correct here in this game. Kind of a wait-and-see approach with Syracuse. But if I had to play, I think I'd lay it here with Syracuse.
Guys, next game up, we got BYU and Arkansas, 7:30 Eastern. Arkansas -7.5 to as high as -8.5 at home, 47.5 being the total.
Open 10. It's kind of a head scratcher to me, Drew, why the BYU money came. I don't understand. But I'm going to put Arkansas in that Kentucky grouping off of a head coaching quote. We love when we do shows with our colleague Teddy Covers because he always brings the quotes. And here's one from Sam Pittman. After they just scored 28 lousy points against Kent State, a team I know they had 0 returning offensive starters because they all hit the transfer portal. And I think the defense was the same. I think the 22 guys on the field to start the season were brand new for Kent, those starters. Anyway, the defense is atrocious. Arkansas scores only 28 at home against them. Sam Pittman says after that game, I think we'll play a much better football game against, no disrespect to Kent, but a much better football program last week. He's a very mild-mannered guy for anybody who's ever seen Sam Pittman speak before, and he doesn't get too high, too low. But to me, that sounds like a coach who went into the locker room and said, we're going to straighten things out here. Or it's a head coach that was coasting, like maybe Kentucky is coasting, through an easy non-conference till they get to conference. But I take this coach at his word because when I watch him, I just feel like he's honest as the day is long. Some of these coaches, you have to weed through their coach speak. When I hear Sam Pittman talk, I feel like he's always telling me the truth. So if he thinks his team is going to play a better game against BYU, a team that last year they scored 52 points on and had 644 total yards, then I have to believe the head coach that his team's going to do a better job here. Certainly they have the personnel. Certainly they were touted to be a better football team than what they've showed so far this year. I think last year's game, Drew, showed us BYU always prides themselves on being the most physical football team on the field in their games. And last year they weren't. Arkansas steamrolled them. Again, 644 total yards, 52 points. Their running offense hasn't gotten going yet. And again, like Kentucky, I don't know if it's by design, it's a vanilla playbook because the opponents were lousy or what it is, but it hasn't gotten going. You expect more out of Arkansas. On that same token, BYU hasn't run the ball whatsoever. They can't run it. And they haven't played the best of competition either. Southern Utah and Sam Houston State. Sam Houston State, an FCS team that has made the jump this year to FBS. And while they were in FCS, they were noted as a top 3 defensive team. So I'll even let BYU slide a little bit for only scoring 14 against Sam Houston. But they can't run it their first 2 games. And their quarterback, Keaton Slovis, as highly touted as he was when he got to USC, still hasn't proven to be consistent in any way, shape, or form. So in my mind, I look at it this way. If you're on the road and you're BYU and you gave up 644 last year to this team and you can't run it against them and you're going to depend on Slovis and what appears to be one of their most pedestrian wide receiving cores in a few years, I think they got offensive problems. I think Arkansas probably opens it up. I don't understand the line move. I will probably play Arkansas in that game and lay the 7.5.
Guys, a reminder, we are brought to you by Viva Tequila Seltzer, vivatequilaseltzer.com. It's not just a drink, it's a statement. Embrace the vibes, own the winning mindset, and let's live it up. Viva Tequila Seltzer, raising a toast to cashing those tickets. Cheers to have those Viva vibes. Hashtag Viva vibes, vivatequilaseltzer.com. Huge shout out to the sponsor of the show. As we move down the list, actually the next 3 games here, Rob, pretty big spreads near at least almost 4 touchdowns to some of them even higher. So we can quick hit them here. All 8:00 Eastern kicks. FAU at Clemson minus 24.5. That's the Clemson Tigers at home. 52 the totals as the Owls make the trip up to Clemson, South Carolina.
Yeah, and I'll even group these, Drew, all in one so that we can skim through them a little bit. Clemson, wow, 24-17 at half last week before Dabo must have lost his mind in the locker room because they came out and won the second half 42-0. That could be an indication of a team that just between the ears wasn't ready to play games, and the coach had to straighten them out. Again, it's an opponent they should have beaten the first half 42-0, but at least they showed it in the second half. Maybe good sign for Clemson, and maybe not a good sign for FAU that they could only score 10 at home against Ohio U. Again, I think, Drew, we hit on this way back in week 1. Ohio U and San Diego State. Even though Curtis Rourke is the quarterback of that team, and he's really good, they're so methodical. They go so slow. They're like an under waiting to happen every time they hit the field, and it's proven out so far. And maybe that just lulled Tom Herman's offense into that type of game. They won't be in that type of game here, but I don't think they'll move the football real well. So I would look probably Clemson or nothing in that contest. Wyoming, Texas, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is if you're Texas, you could half-heart this one and win the game. You're off the Alabama victory. Is there a letdown coming? Wyoming always comes to play physically for 60 minutes. It's not like Wyoming is at home when they caught Texas Tech and beat them in overtime. They're on the road here. But still, I wouldn't lay it with Texas simply because of the situation. The spot screams of Wyoming plus points, especially if Texas gets off to a big lead and yanks starters. And then the third game, Hawaii and Oregon, I like the total. Again, Oregon's off a big win last week against Texas Tech. Come from behind, and boy, what a cover, right? You pick off a pass. Oh, yeah. The only thing that could happen to beat Texas Tech, and a lot of tickets got shredded on that. But Oregon at home, no reason to want to destroy Hawaii, except that seems to be the Oregon way over the years, is to score points. Even if they're going to be in a letdown situation, they still score. Hawaii can score. Oregon's defense probably, again, a little bit of a letdown. So I think the total's low there, 68.5. Shouldn't, I mean, to use the word low with 68.5 sounds a little crazy, but Oregon probably finds their way to 45, 48, and I think Hawaii can find their way to get that thing up and over. So I would probably make a small play on Oregon, Hawaii over the number.
Great job there, Rob. Knocking out 3 of them in a row. Is next one up. 5 games left here. TCU at Houston, little in-state rivalry, -7.5. That's the Horned Frogs as the road team. 64 being the total in Houston, Texas.
I think, Drew, that you might have to question Houston now. You know, they beat Texas San Antonio in week 1 when all the money came toward UTSA. And I know I was on here with you, and prior to that game when we analyzed it, I had said Dana Holgerson in the offseason was pretty much telling everybody he enjoys the fact that they're picked low in the Big 12. He thinks he's got a really good team. And then they go out and beat UTSA. And I'm like, wow, maybe he's right. And then they come back and they can't stop Rice on offense whatsoever and get beat in overtime by Rice in a game that's like almost, it's an intercity rivalry, right? You're battling for recruits, Houston and Rice. So down the drain went my thoughts of Houston being a better defense. And then I started thinking about this Frank Harris injury to UTSA is a big deal because UTSA hasn't looked good offensively for 2 weeks and he's played hurt. Jeff Traylor came out this week and said, this kid's been pretty banged up for 2 weeks now, and he's given us his best. He got an injection. He went out of the game last week for a series, took an injection, came back and played the rest of the game. So tough kid, but not 100% healthy. And it sort of dampers my idea that Houston was going to be maybe a team that would fly under the radar and we could capitalize on. TCU, Sonny Dykes and company, obviously they want to make right for what happened against Colorado. Certainly he told us before the game he didn't know what to expect from Deion in Colorado. He said, I hate being the team that has to play him first because I don't know what they're going to do. And it looked like it on the field. It looked like it. I think TCU bounces back here, Drew. They've gotten the money. It's gone from 6 to 7.5. I've lost a little bit of faith in Houston. I could be wrong, but the way I saw Rice shred them last week, I'm not so sure I want to be. And that's JT Daniels at quarterback. JT Daniels, a guy much like Keaton Slovis, who's been around the country with different teams and has never really proven to be the guy he was touted to be. So I think I'd look TCU in that game.
Yeah, market agreeing with you. Like you said, 7.5 pretty much across the board now as you bring up Colorado, and we get it up next. Colorado State in Colorado, 10 p.m. Eastern time, a little late night action here, Rob. 61 being the total, and we are seeing the Buffs at home -23.5 point favorites.
And why not? I mean, if you want to lay it with somebody, go ahead and lay it with these guys against this type of opponent, because this is another opponent that Colorado can out-talent, out-physical, outspeed. I don't even know if those are words, but I think you get what I'm trying to say here. They've just got the physical advantages in every single area in this game. And interesting that, they didn't play a good offensive first half against Nebraska. Let's give Nebraska's defense a ton of credit. They hung in as long as they could, but their offense was so bad and they turned it over so much that eventually the dam just burst and Colorado got their points second half, maybe the last 1.25 quarters. But Deion wants points. We heard him use the word dominate 100 times last week. I want to dominate. I don't want to win. I want to dominate, dominate, dominate. This is his in-state rival. He's in here his first year. He's going to get one thing clear. We're the kingpin in this state. Not that they haven't been before, but Colorado, when they fell on hard times, Colorado State was the program the last couple of years looked at as the better team. I don't think Colorado State stands a chance here. Jay Norvell hasn't turned this team around one bit since he took over for the guy from Boston College. I'm missing his Steve Adazio. So to me, I've got a coach who wants to run up scores. He's got the horses to run up a score. He's got this situational rivalry to run up a score. It's less than 24, 23.5 to me is a key number here because, you wind up winning this game 38-14, 45-21. You win the bet. I think those are real feasible. Colorado might get to 50 in this game if he really wants to get there, and I think Deion does.
Robert, yeah, I mean, are we sure that he wants to run up the score though? I guess he hasn't really been in this price range in Division I, but I mean, I can see it. I don't know if we've actually seen that as sports bettors. Do you know if he was doing that at Jacksonville State?
Well, at Jackson State, they had a much better defense, and they were more of a run-heavy team because they could the line of scrimmage was theirs, following them pretty close. And they pretty much went unblemished, Drew, until the big games. Like at the end of the year when the championship game came or the bowl games came, they couldn't win them against non-conference people, but they would run right through the conference. Here, they're a little different because they're so wide open. And again, when you're looking at 23.5, we say this all the time. You want a lot of possessions. You want a lot of plays. You want a team with explosiveness. And maybe run up the score isn't quite the right idea or the right phrase because it makes it sound like, 13 seconds left in the game. He's going to try and score. But I do feel, and James Franklin did this in the first week, when these new wave head coaches put their second teamers and third team or second teamers out there, they feel like these kids deserve a chance to get in the end zone. James Franklin used that exact quote, that he believes his kids shouldn't have to just kneel on the ball. They practice hard. They finally get their chance in the game. I'm going to let them go. And I think Deion feels the same way. So they probably have enough talent to get the big enough lead anyway without needing a late score to cover this. But I just don't see Colorado State putting up much of a fight here.
Rocky Mountain Showdown, guys, as we got 4 games in this 10 o'clock Eastern slate. Next one up, Fresno State and Arizona State, 10:30 Eastern. -3, that's the Bulldogs as the road favorite. 50.5, the total in Tempe.
I've seen Arizona State twice now, Drew, and I want no part of them. No part of Arizona State. I mean, that's very rarely. I'm not one of those guys who gets thick-headed against a certain team, like I'm never going to play them again. I'm never going to do them, or I'll always play the same team all the time. But Arizona State's a team that I don't want any part of currently. Against Oklahoma State last week, they looked lousy offensively. There's a lot of work to do at Oregon State. And, hey, we love Herm Edwards, but that cupboard was left a mess. And what they have to deal with right now is troublesome against the competition that they play. Fresno's always going to come to play. Jeff Tedford's got a really explosive offense again. And I think that's the separation in this game. Arizona State has zero explosiveness, zero consistency. Their quarterbacking is very inconsistent at this point in time, where I can rely on Fresno State. As I mentioned earlier, they came back at West Lafayette and beat Purdue 39-35. Purdue's every bit as good a defensive team as Arizona State is. Purdue's probably the better offensive team than Arizona State. So I don't see why Tedford can't go on the road at this price and win again.
2 games left here, guys. Is this next one? We just saw Kansas prime time. What was that? Friday night looked pretty good. Now they're laying 4 touchdowns here, Robbie. We're talking Kansas at Nevada. minus 28. That's the Jayhawks as the road favorite, 58 the total.
Boy, I don't know if pretty good is even a good enough way to describe what Kansas looked like the other night. They looked unstoppable.
They did.
Especially on offense against Illinois. And I know Illinois has suffered a lot of losses on that defensive side of the football and key losses. And it's not like Brett Bielema and Illinois recruit the way Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State in the Big Ten recruit. I mean, when he gets a group like he got last year where 3 defensive backs are drafted in the first 3 rounds, it's hard to recoup that. And boy, Jalen Daniels ate them up. They looked faster. They looked stronger. They looked better. Win that game by 11. I don't even know if 11 really depicts how badly they beat Illinois in that game. Nevada, I just talked about Colorado State not wanting to put up a fight. Nevada and Colorado State should just go for 11 weeks and play each other. It would be competitive. We'd get probably good games out of it, but they're the same talent level at this point in time. What Idaho out of the FCS did to Nevada last week and again, Idaho's a playoff team in the FCS, and they used to be FBS. It's only their 2nd or 3rd year in FCS, but to have Idaho come in there and I think score the first 5 touchdowns and just run roughshod over that team tells you the state that the program is in. Kansas ascending like crazy. And if I'd have told you last year in 2022, or I don't know, 3 years ago, hey, Drew, 3rd week of 2023, we're going to see Kansas as a 28-point favorite on the road. You just said, Rob, hey, listen, go have your head examined. But it's where we're at. It's where we're at. Kansas is capable. I don't know that they'll do it, but I don't want Nevada. So case closed. Kansas or nothing.
Yeah, I would have never guessed that, Robbie. Although I remember when Kansas hired him, I said, Lance Leopold, that's a great hire.
Yeah.
From betting him at Buffalo. And then even before that, I believe at the FCS level, he's always been a great coach. So I thought it was a great hire when he went there. But Rob, great stuff as always. We got 1 game left here. Guys, follow Rob on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports. You can see his premium plays at wagertalk.com. We are brought to you by Viva Tequila Seltzer. This is what it looks like, guys. Go check it out, vivatequilaseltzer.com. 0 sugar, 4.5% ABV. You can put a shot of tequila in it, and then it's a loaded Viva. So whatever you want to do, go check it out, vivatequilaseltzer.com. Last game up here, Robbie, the nightcap, the degenerate special, whatever we're calling it, 213, 214 to talk every single game on the week 3 college football board. UTEP and Arizona, 57.5 being the total, minus 18. That is Arizona at home in Tucson. I'll tell you this, Sun City, he's a good follower here, fan of the show, if you will. He's a UTEP fan, and they're not happy with Dana Dimmel. But I do think their quarterback's pretty good. That's at least what I had them rated coming in just from last season. And is Arizona that good to be laying 18? Maybe they are, Robbie. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I just talked about a team that you just put an F next to as in fade. That was Arizona State. But their rival, Arizona, I think is a play on right now. Jed Fish. I've been critical of Jed Fish for a number of years at the college level, Drew, because his playbook is so thick and so complicated and it takes so long, and he's really never been that successful. He's been far more successful in the NFL with his playbook than he has at the college level. But here, Arizona seems to have gotten it. And I watched that game last week, and they're a pretty sizable underdog. And boy, they fought, and they can score. They can flat out score points against teams. So I like them. I got in at 17, the opening number. It's up to 18 now. So, 18 can be a key number, 38 to 20. You don't cash the ticket that I'm going to cash. But I still don't want any part of Texas El Paso. And I'd have to be in agreement with Sun City, I think you said it was. Dana Dimmel came into this year. And one of Dana Dimmel's quotes that I remember from last year is, I'm a firm believer in offensive line, and it takes 4 to 5 years to build a solid offensive line and then be able to just do turnstile with your offensive line. And this year, he had the most career starts he's ever had at UTEP, offensive line. And, he's of that Kansas State mentality, Bill Snyder, run, play defense. And Gavin Hardison, the quarterback you referred to, has been there like 4 or 5 years. And he's got a good arm. but they just don't know how to pass. They really don't know how to pass. And they still don't run it well enough, no matter how many offensive linemen they have back. Last week, money went, and I guess it's based on Northwestern, the whole offseason scandal, the blowout against Rutgers. Northwestern comes home to play UTEP. Everybody bets UTEP. And UTEP gets destroyed by 31 points by a team that can actually stand up at the line of scrimmage. I don't think Texas El Paso has anywhere near the speed that this Arizona team has. And just watching Arizona's physicality last week, they look improved, Drew. So I'm high on one side. I'm very low on the other. 18 is a tricky number when you're dealing with a team like Arizona that hasn't won in quite some time. However, they look like they're ready to burst. And if they go at such a fast pace that if UTEP comes with some of these 3 and outs, run, punt, run, punt, Arizona could put up 21 in the blink of an eye on them. And it could be all over from that point on, because let's remember, UTEP's not designed to chase whatsoever with that offense. So I did bet Arizona at minus 17. I would say that if you're looking at it, if you're listening to me and you want a tail, I might lessen it just a hair, because 18 is a key number. You might push rather than win, but I still like Arizona.
All the games in the books, guys. We'll get a most confident play here from Rob Veno. Follow him on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports, wagertalk.com. I'm Drew Martin. This is every game on the board, guys. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, wherever you're downloading your podcasts at, just search every game on the board. Robbie, great stuff as always, man. Hitting every single one of these in part number 4. I'll throw it back to you. Do you have a most confident play for the listeners?
You know what? Let's go back a couple of steps, Drew. I'm going to try and avoid most of these high point spread games and leave those to the listeners. But I'm going to go back to Syracuse and Purdue. And I know Syracuse's schedule is against a couple of lesser opponents. But you watch them, and it just seems different. And I got a lot of firm belief in Garrett Schrader at this point in time. When he was at Mississippi State, I don't think his talents got used exactly to his skill set, right? Mike Leach wanted him to throw, and Garrett Schrader is more of a dual threat. His legs are just as big a threat as his arm. But I think both sides of the football are good now. So I don't like enough out of what I've seen out of Purdue so far. I'll lay the 2.5 as a best bet here with Syracuse on the road. Hope they win by a field goal against Purdue.
All right, good breakdown, Robbie. Anything else before we shut it down?
Good luck to the listeners. Obviously, we get a lot of response to this show, Drew. In fact, I just saw one in a comment section for a Wager Talk show where the guy was asking, do the two of us still do every game on the board? And I'm like, yeah, tune in at 5 o'clock today. You'll see it. It's not going away. So thanks to everybody who watches. We appreciate all of you, and hopefully everybody's cashing tickets this weekend.
Absolutely, guys. At Rob Veno Sports, every game on the board, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, wherever you're downloading your podcast at, guys. So I'm Drew Martin. That does it for the show this week. We will be back next week, week number 4, talking every single game on the board. Please comment below. Let us know you're listening. Smash that like button. Cash those tickets, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great weekend.